MST Performative Art is committed to growing consensual relationships with the Nisithippi, Blackfoot Confederacy, and the people of the Treaty 7 region, which includes the Tsuut'ina, Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, and the Ayarhe Nakota, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, on whose lands we live. This territory is home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3, and we are grateful for the land where the Bow and Elbow rivers meet, called Mohkinstsis in Blackfoot, which means elbow.
Welcome to our first episode of this podcast, which we are temporarily calling Let's Be Mutual. The purpose of this podcast is this main question. We wonder if there is something more direct that contemporary art or artist-run centers could offer to its communities during a time of social unrest. And additionally, what might the community want from an artist-run center? All of us have been thinking about these questions, but none of us are experts. Bianca, would you like to begin on that thought?
A lot of the times that we collaborated together was not about being perfect, and it's more about being in relationship to each other and learning. And this is something that as a group we really deeply valued and ever evolving. And I think that when we shared this podcast together, from all the different perspectives that each of us brings, I don't want to speak by the group, but I think I'm doing it anyway. So if you don't agree, please jump in. Is that we're no experts. We're learning as much as you're learning by listening to us. And this is where we are at in our journey. We might have arrived here before than you, but your journey might take you further, quote unquote, at a different moment in time. So that's where we're at.
And I'd just like to add that that this work has to be based in the places that we are. So as we move through the world, even through different communities within a city, it's always going to be different. And that's why it's so important to be honest about that, because we just don't have all the experiences, and that's what the beauty of this work is that sharing of where we're experts or where we know, which is our own experience, and how that meets with where we're all learning.
We want to do a bit of an intro into who we are and get into how we came into being this group of humans. Who wants to start?
Prudence. Okay, since you selected me, my name is Prudence. Okay, that's also my mother. So y'all know, in case she's making funny comments, Philomene is my mother. I'm an organizer with BPU, which stands for Black People United, which is a mutually collective that formed back in August of 2020. We are just a group of people who are just dedicated to, offering mutual to Black communities in Calgary. Who am I? Gosh, these questions, who am I? I have no idea. It's not funny. Yeah, so I think, that work is a big part of who I am. I'm also a student who's thinking of dropping out. So don't listen to this, kids, stay in school. But I'm a student of sociology and African studies, which I really enjoy, but I'm having a little life crisis. Yeah, and I've lived in Calgary for 15 years, so this is very much home for me. And yeah, that's the gist for me. Let me pass it on to Bianca to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Bianca Guimarães de Manuel. I think more and more I think of myself as a facilitator, as someone who supports and facilitates other people's process in a creative practice, or more as well on a social support level for social movement stuff. And I moved to Mohkinstsis, Calgary in 2016 from Curitiba, Paraná, Brazil. And I've worked very closely with BPU, CBF, who is not present, unfortunately, today in this podcast, today, and MST and Qian. And yeah, I don't know. It's I think a lot of what I artistically, my practice is always thinking about space and how people share space. I guess, yeah, that's me. Philomene, maybe you want to go next?
Madame Treke, speak French. And who am I? I think I define myself as someone who always look around. I'm very aware of what happened around me. I always pick up, like, if it's something wrong with someone around me, it's so easy for me to see that there's something that is not going on. And we come down to create BPU, Black People United. I remember one day saying to Prudence, you always said, as a child, you feel like there was something wrong about the world. Then when she get into reading books, and then she start to asking so many questions, why this is wrong. Then one morning I say, why can't you create something and we can just take it from there and see, and then I can use more of what I have, like looking around me to see, is there someone struggle? I'm always asking people questions. Are you happy? Can I help? And this is how we come down to create BPU and just keep looking around and helping people. But that's something I truly ask everyone to be alert. I'm always looking around me at the bus stop. I will exactly tell you what I see every single day. And that's who I am. And Desiree, you are my favorite.
Well, yeah, my name is Desiree Nault, and I'm very grateful to hold the position of Artistic Director at MST Performative Art. As the Artistic Director who's representing an institution, an arts institution, and also as a white person, I wasn't like involved necessarily in all the workings of the group, because I think something that evolved over time in our work together was a practical distance between what the mutual aid group was doing and what MST needed to do or was doing it as an institution, and kind of giving the mutual aid working group a space of authorship and self-determination within the group. And that's hard to do sometimes when there's someone representing MST involved in that all the time. So I'm going to let malidi follow that up with their introduction.
Nuqua malidi, Mercedes Tlin, Gayu Tlin Lach, Mimcomlis Glue, Yalis Glue, Atlagi Glue, Fort Williams Glue, Europe. Guquan Lach Mokensis. Hi everyone, my Kwakula name is Malidi. My English name is Mercedes. I use the pronouns they, she. I am very fortunate to have got to be a part of this project, and I feel like I also don't know how to describe what I do yet, which I feel like has been like a thread through a lot of our discussions throughout our time together. But being open to emergent processes and the way that we are able to just learn from each other's lived experiences is something that I feel like I've been able to cultivate more in this space than in other spaces. I do sit on the board of MST as well, and work in the arts. I'm an art writer, and really just interested in researching mutual aid in both, reading as well as just being around people who are also interested in it. And I'm going to pass it on to Qian.
Hi, I'm Qian. I am here with Bianca doing this work for the past few months, and it's been a pretty great ride so far. Not pretty great, pretty awesome. I would describe myself as an emerging organizer and person who is trying to figure out what art means to them and what art could do. I think for the longest time, I've been negotiating external expectations that has guided my life a lot. And I am only just realizing what boundaries are and what standing up for yourself is. And I feel like that has only come along through the past few months of working with very strong individuals who have taught me a lot of these things. And of course, very, very grateful for the conversations that were had and the learning that has been done. And yeah, I guess that would be my introduction to myself. Shall we move on to some of the main definitions that we want to ground this podcast with? Let's start off with mutual aid. And what we're going to do is pass the mic around the table. Everyone can kind of give a sentence or two of what this term is to you. Again, we'll start with mutual aid. Let's start with Prudence.
I read this book by Dean Spade, which I think it's called like Mutual Aid Building Solidarity. And like at the little fold over, it says there that I think it's a mutual aid is about helping each other while trying to change the world. And I really like that because it addresses two things that I think mutual aid is supposed to address, which is caring for one another, but from a political stance, from the understanding that we're doing this because we've been failed by the system or the institutions in place. So to me, I look at mutual aid as like, we have to look out for one another because we have a collective understanding that if we don't, no one else is coming to help us. So I guess, did I even answer the question? That's what mutual aid is to me, really. It's about taking care of each other. It's about the people looking out for one another, but from an understanding that as we're doing that, we have to drastically change the world in which we live in. Malidi, what is mutual aid to you?
I love that. I'm going to look into that book soon. And I just wrote down anti-capitalist and anti-scarcity mindset. That's kind of like my quick way of talking about that. And I think that's something that I'm working on too. Like, I think these are also things that I want to undo in my brain so that I can be better at mutual aid. Philomene?
The best way to define mutual aid for everyone is just do something, get involved, help around, do something every single day. There's always someone beside you who needs your support and your help. No matter how you're going to support, let's support each other every single day. Bianca?
I think mutual aid to me is understanding that it comes a lot with the resource redistribution bit and like understanding that people from the global majority are more at harm than the little percentage of people who own all and exploit all people and resources, most the people from the global majority. I think it's just like, it's a very powerful tool to shift the ways the systems that are in place harm us. That's where I'm at today.
Yeah, something that you said made me think of the term maybe like manifesting a kind of curiosity that mutual aid does for me. Like, it can be a very practical thing, but it's also the acknowledgement that outside of the way that we, like buy everything that we need, or that we have these certain specific ways of going through the world, that there's a lot you can do to be more creative or curious than that in your day-to-day life. Like, not all of your interactions have to be mediated by capital or money or like what you have in your wallet. And also the recognition of how sad that mindset is. And you could say that a lot of different processes are this, but I think it's also like learning what healthy interconnection is, that the process of learning mutual aid brings you into a state of maybe more healthy interconnection and like a more healthy reliance on people, on your peers and the people in your community, that bypasses like a kind of a negative and exploitative way of engaging in the world. Yeah, I guess that's all I'd say. Chen?
It's funny because I remember first coming across the term mutual aid just last year and being like, what is this? I kind of think I have a sense of what it means. But everything that everyone has just talked about, so amazing and so great. Something that I think, just jumping off of what Desiree is saying, how like realizing, acknowledging that so many of our interactions are transactional. In our research at the beginning, we came across this thing called time banking. And at first we thought, oh, this is also a form of mutual aid. But now realizing actually that is a very transactional way of interacting with each other too, because essentially what time banking is I will give you this service or this thing in exchange for 2 or 3 hours of your time. And that in itself is quite transactional. Whereas with mutual aid, it's the act of giving. And that in itself is is already good enough. Like we shouldn't expect anything else. Yeah, that's where I'm at with the term mutual aid. So the next question is, what is socially engaged art to you?
I think even before discussing what is socially engaged art, I think we have to first talk about the role of art, right? Which I think to me, you know, I am not an artist, right? It's so maybe I shouldn't even be talking, because who am I to dictate what art is supposed to be?
Oh, go for it.
I'm just like, you know, a citizen of the world, but I always imagine that art is supposed to reflect the times. You know, art, it has to be a reflection of the society in which the artist lives, right? Or, you know, the experiences, the people they meet. So, you know, I think when I look at art, I have to be able to say something about that moment when they created that art. So when we think about, okay, if when I think about what I think art is supposed to be, and then you ask me, you know, what is social? What's the question?
What is socially engaged art?
Socially engaged art. Well, art is supposed to engage society. I guess that's what I would say, right? Like, what is non-socially engaged art is what I'm actually now asking. Like, is that even art? Like, what is that? Because I just think that art is supposed to engage society. It has to, you know, it has to speak about the society in which the artist lives in, and it has to, you know, question that society, challenge that society. So, you know, to me, first, I guess I would answer is that art has to engage a society. If you're not, I don't know what we call you. Are you even art? What do we call you?
I guess there's just different levels of engagement. Like some art just engages a certain group of people, and then some art engages another group of people. And then some art doesn't strive to be much more than that. And I guess maybe with socially engaged art, it is speaking more towards community.
And Desiree?
I was just gonna say, I guess in the process of the art making, does the engagement happen? One of our questions was going to be, how do you follow the life of an idea? And I think that socially engaged art as a principle is following the life of an idea, in that everyone is alive in the process. There's no end result. The people who need to be involved are involved to the extent that they can be. And it is very much a collective activity. And whatever you come to, like, it doesn't need to be a material object or anything. But then, you know, there are those people that spend 6 years in their studio making the thing that they need to make, and then they present it to the world. And then that's where the engagement happens through aesthetics. We're not necessarily like, I don't think anything that we've done is in that realm, but that is a realm.
I still don't get the meaning of art, but I studied literature in school, and the first definition of art, or the importance of art, is that art speaks so loud. And if your art can impact the world or the society or live in the moment, the artist needs to revive what he's talking about and what he's doing. So art should be at the center of unrest situation. That's the definition of art, because getting from artists, apparently their vision comes first before everyone. And that vision must have an impact. I don't believe in a silent art, but artists should really be impacted the moment on unrest. They should be so loud in different areas. That's how I see artists in a social way.
And yeah, I think I coming off of what Philomene just said, I think I struggled, like when I moved here and I first just heard that, like, yeah, socially engaged art practice, like that terminology, I was very confused. And I think it's just because going through theater, doing theater in Brazil, like you're always doing theater as like art in Brazil is a political act, because you do not have funding from the government, you don't have resources, you're doing it as a tool for fight for democracy, because there's so much dictatorship, there's so much poverty, there's so much things happening, that like it's always in response and in community and with the community. And it's like also playful, because it's also dancing and celebrating and joyful and like also a tool for resistance. I think to me, I guess like socially engaged art for me is joyful and a tool for resistance that happens between people.
Yeah. I think of the quote, I think Amir Bakara, he said that the artist's role is to raise a consciousness of the people, to make them understand life and the world and themselves. And he's an artist. And so to me, when I hear what you just said, Bianca, about the art in your country, you know, it's like, you know, it's to move people to action, right? Like the artists, you know, the artists have to move people into action. Like you have to awaken our conscience. Like your art has to be like a tool of resistance. I absolutely agree. So to me, I think that art should socially engage, like should be engaging people. It should engage the society it lives in, because I don't know, like, then what is the purpose of your art then? If it's not a reflection of the world, the society, if like, what are you making art for? I guess I truly wonder if not for that.
And then yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I think there are all the silos too. Like there's all like those very formalized, like I think it's very like, oh, they're like this, I don't know, in Canada. And maybe I'm being in Calgary. Maybe I should speak about Calgary. And this is what I feel from like a foreign lens, is that there is like the silo of the people who do theater, but then the people who do theater in an opera context, and the people who do theater in a horror movie style, and then it's just like so many silos, and it's just, I don't know, I just think there's something to do with the silos too, and how those things are just divisive in regards to the art in itself. I don't know.
And that my confusion when I hear about artists, because as you said, art is, there's a fun side in art, but we shouldn't just see that art is fun, is humor, people are laughing, but underneath your art, they did great message. Because we have that definition in French that art is the way to change society by laughing. You are laughing, you are jumping, but there's that message that is critical to the moment. And if you don't have that message behind your art, for we it becomes vain. And
I sorry, I struggle with that, because I got my Bachelor of Arts in Emily Carr University, and I just remember always constantly being asked, how does your art fit into this history of art? How does it fit into the canon? And I'm like, why does that matter? And that's probably why I'm here too. It's like, what can art do? And why does it have to fit into a specific like white person's history? And yeah, that really screwed me up for a while.
Yeah. I just want to riff on that with my art school anger, which is just to say, but I was just thinking about that quote from sometime in the winter, and I'll just preface by saying that Adrienne Marie Brown has been like hugely inspirational to all of us. But she said this year that the movement for Black lives was growing to be the best artist that ever lived. And I think that in that sentence, there's a lot of challenges to what we traditionally think of as what is an artist. You know, as a collective, a movement can become an artist, and what qualifies as art. So I love that. And then I also love what someone in Mokins Jordan Balon said to us this year. And I can't remember.
Against art for art's sake.
Yes. Like the idea of arts for art's sake comes from a Western conception of art. It's like taken for a given that artists are going to be making work, you know, just be cut to make the work. But it was eye-opening to me, that argument that's like so deeply entrenched here in particular, in an argument against all these other practices, and especially socially engaged art, is just the byproduct of like, you know, just the Western canon. And what else is there? There's a lot out there. Anyway,
I guess what's out there is what's community to you all.
So basically, like just thinking like, what even is a community? And I came across this piece by Mia Mingus, who is a transformative justice facilitator, amazing person. And I just made some notes that I'll read off because I don't want to butcher or like not say the right thing, but basically the idea of pod mapping. And it's the way of describing or seeking to describe the kind of relationship between people who can turn to each other for support. And this idea is more specific than the word community as a term to be used to describe many things. Like community can be used to say a group of people in the same geography, a group of people with the same interests or values, a group of people who share the same identity. And basically, you can be a part of the community, but not feel connected to that community. You might not feel like you have a good enough relationship with those individuals and to call upon when you need support. And what pod mapping is this network that you can rely on in response to violence, harm, or abuse. These are people that you trust, basically. And basically, what Mia is trying to say, I think, is community as a term is too vague, and that's why there needs to be more terms to be introduced, such as pod mapping. And that's why, like, sometimes when we see like phrases like, "Oh, we need community accountability," what does that really mean? Who is being held accountable? Who will be holding people accountable? And like, what is a community to you, and what is a community to someone else?
I like with pod mapping is that the relationships, like really looking at your relationships, because I think that I think this year it's been really heightened for people that have either been able to isolate or have, no other choice but to isolate, um, have not had these connections and have had this kind of rift in how we're able to quantify our own relations and like really see where people we can depend on are. And like I also acknowledge like the very like, bird's eye view kind of zoom out of community that we all live in a world, and we have to be accountable to the fact that billionaires are like allowing shit to burn. And then there's like, okay, but then and then what can I do without being mean to myself? Like, like, which I think we've all been working on in this process. Like, okay, what do our skills do to help BPU? Or like, what can we share? And the pod mapping is something that I think I want to bring more into community spaces that want accountability so that we can feel less alone because of what social media has kind of done to some of our views of our relationships. And and being in community means being honest about your capacity and not taking it personally. I think community needs to be anti-ableist, anti like all the phobias that people could have, and to be, willing to learn. I think that's, where I want community to kind of be for me.
For the people who have visited Glamour Museum, I remember when I came to Calgary, there is this long sentence in the word that says, in Africa, a whole community raised a child. And this comes down to mutual aid. When they say in Africa, this is a dreamland for Western culture. When they really put that sentence, and they quote that all the time, because that's what mutual aid, looking after someone without expecting, without being judged. Like that's exactly what mutual aid, like just willing to support, because in Africa, it's a whole village who look after each other. And we have that sentence in the Calgary Black Empowerment Museum just for decoration, because that is a dreamland for them, because this is called a selfish individual society. So, and that's why mutual is like, people think like we are crazy to really go out there and try to help someone that you don't ask any question, because there's no question asked. He needs help, we stand. And that's the same thing a community is like in Africa. You meet a child on the street that is hungry, you stop. A child is doing something, you stop. Any person who is struggling, and that's the dreamland for Western culture, but it is possible.
Yes. Oh, it's really a decoration though in the Glenbow Museum if you think about, because it's like, what are you putting that there for? You're definitely not trying to, practice that, right? It's just, yeah. And I think, my mom is so right. Like really community, like it has to be grounded in collective care. Community cannot be a spatial thing, which I think it's what it's kind of seen at in these Western countries, like, oh, within this quadrant, that's my community. Like, no, some of us have neighbors we have never spoken to in our 10 years of being neighbors. We're not in community with these people. Community has to be a space where I think a space where folks feel affirmed, like there has to be that relationship, that care, in order, we really just use the word community a bit too loosely.
Yeah,
A lot of us are not actually in communities with anybody. A lot of us do not belong to a community. We just belong to shared space. Like we need to start saying that, shared space, right? So yeah, I think, to me, community is just about, it just all just comes down again to just care. It's just, and she's so right, because I think we live in societies that are so individualistic, like just so mind-blowingly, like it's all about you, the individual. You take care of yourself. You're like just responsible for everything in your life. And it's like, I don't think it's okay to expect a single individual to be responsible for everything that happens to them, So I think, of community as divesting from the individual, because there's such a burden of individuality in these societies. We live in societies that are, I would say, sick. And a lot of us are sick, but we're also expected to take care of that illness that is produced by our whole societies. But I, the individual, I'm supposed to take care of it. So yeah, I think it's like rejecting the individual and just like embracing collective care and, people.
I'm snapping over here.
Yeah, I want to like accentuate what Prudence said about sharing space within like the arts community, because I think that that's something that in the absence of gathering together in artistry centers and galleries and things like that has been kind of revealed, is that what we thought we were doing when we were sharing that space was building a community. And I have thought throughout the year that I'm not sure that that is true, and I'm very critical of that assumption. And because I mean, for me, I think that there's an element of like meaning making in community and in interdependence, and that those relationships are, just they become meaningful. And I don't know, I can't really qualify what that means, but I don't think that that is necessarily present or like take it like a given just because you attend a bunch of openings together.
And that's why there's a big difference between solidarity and charity. Community mutual aid is all about solidarity. That means it's very profound in a community, because solidarity comes from solidar, means together we stand strong. But the community we live in this country, we don't even like, there's no meaning. But it's possible to create a strong community. I still believe with few people willing, we can create a healthy, strong community. It's possible, but it's a dreamline.
A dream, but it's possible.
To me, I think community is it's embodied. Like you feel it in your body when you're in community with people. It's connection. Like there is a level of connection that you have when you're in community that is not bureaucratic. That is not like doesn't follow a specific, I don't even know the word, but
structure.
Yeah, I think like it's more fluid perhaps. In the relationships. And I think that and this is the tricky thing, because it's like we can be in community together, but like as like what it means to me might means a different thing to all of you. But so there is a level of like being together in difference to community too, perhaps. Even if it's like sharing togetherness in a difference. But I really, really dig that what Prudence said about the difference of like sharing space and being in community, and also what Qian shared around like the pods and all that everyone has shared. I don't know, it's just like, I think it's a big question, because I think it's also what are our expectations to the community, what are our contributions to the community.
I think that's a good segue into one of our first questions, which is, are art institutions even compatible with community building? I think one of the big questions I have is, as a body of individuals, how do we negotiate boundaries and care as an institution? I guess that's two questions. Sorry. How can an institution that is, buried in bureaucracy act with the amount of care and flexibility that we just spoke about?
I guess I'd like to just acknowledge like something that impacts like sometimes how these places are viewed too, like, or something like we're publicly funded, and that's like such a huge part of it. So as somebody who's like worked within these spaces, but also like really it doesn't work for me in a lot of ways, or a lot of people that work in them. And what we're expected to do versus like what we're able to do. And also how, if we are going to do that, how do we make community that we're accountable to? What do those boundaries look like without us being the one, like, how do we even come to that community kind of thing without, because some of us really don't get that much funding. And it's like, how do you pay everybody? That's like been a lot of what we've been talking about. And like, it's hard because in community building, you're asking people to be more vulnerable with you. And there's a lack of trust, which I think is founded. And it's not safe for many people. And yeah, it's very alienating space and a very invalidating space for a lot of people. And we have a history that is steeped in white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and, just with the reconciliation stuff, like making sure to have Indigenous like people, which is like one part of like the many majorities that make up this country. And like racialized people that like, maybe don't get the same consideration. So yeah, I'm like, it's hard because I know the history of like at least Mohkinstsis and how it's created by white people. And I don't know if they're compatible as they stand right now.
So true.
But yeah.
That's a good point. Compatible as they stand, which I think to me right now would look very performative if, these moves towards communities were made by arts institution, because where y'all been, right? Now we know we're in a really great time of performative allyship, like my least favorite word in the world. Like, so I think a lot of us, racialized folk, we're kind of like very skeptical because we know everybody right now is just trying to fill a quota, some EDI initiative, some tokenism. So it's a lot of games being played on racialized communities. So we're very skeptical. It's like, where were you before, what was it, May 26th, when George Floyd was murdered, right? Why are you now just trying to get in community with us? So I think that, in art institutions, they really need to first, I think before you move towards the people you're trying to move towards, you have to sit with yourself and ask yourself, okay, why are we even trying to reach these people? Like, what are we truly trying to do? And what does it look like, what we're trying to do? Does this make sense? And why are we trying to do it now? And how long are we willing to stick around? Because, this is a fad, and we know that in a year or two, folks will forget everything that's happened in 2020 and just move on. So I think, like you said, as it stands, these institutions are not compatible at all because they've never sought to be before. So now they need to question why they want to be now. Because when you do things in a moment of like kind of like a hyper focus on everybody to make sure everybody's not racist, you're just trying to do things like a fad. Are you genuine? Will you be asking these questions to yourself in 10 years? Will you still be there in 10 years, right? So really, it's like, I think art institutions need to have these conversations amongst themselves. And if they're honest, and then they can proceed with caution and expect a lot of skepticism, which is completely earned. They should expect a lot of side eyes and no's. But if it's genuine, they'll continue, right? It's the folks who aren't genuine who are here to, check off a quota that will eventually give up and be like, well, we try to get our token Black situation going. So we love a pause.
To kind of ride on the tokenism, this is maybe a spicy topic, but that topic was brought up between Bianca and I too about, like, why suddenly a Chinese Canadian and a Brazilian invited into MST, right? And this is something that we were kind of just chatting amongst ourselves, like, how, like this, like, we don't think this is tokenism. We think this is very genuine. But yeah, it was something like, it's the trust again, like something that we're working through. But yeah.
What I think, where I think it gets like, the conversation gets nuanced around like where they are at right now, like institutions in itself, is that it's like, even when people working for institutions have really good intentions, the bureaucratic system of the non-for-profit sector can lead to tokenistic outcomes, because of like, I don't know, I can't say for sure, like this information that I'm sharing is not based on data, but like what I've learned here when I was at university at UFC was that like the Canadian funding for the arts goes through waves of like specific themes. So there were years that there were like the multiculturalism themes, and then the projects that were multicultural would get more funded. And then there were years that were projects that they moved from multiculturalism to something different. And then there are all the themes. And like, it's kind of clear with the grant guidelines that those themes exist and there are certain preferences. Therefore, a lot of institutions shift their mandates, shift their missions to fall under certain things or their projects to access more funds for arts institutions. And that's where it gets very tokenistic. And to me, there is something that like, sometimes it feels everything becomes marketplace in North America. Like everything becomes a market. Even when you like, even the non-for-profit, maybe this is not fair to say, because I guess the non-for-profit sector is not like making a profit in itself, but like the aspect of the currency and like the finances, they impact the decisions of like, and the creative decisions. And so like, and was something that why we decided to do this podcast, because we were having like very deep discussions of, okay, it's important for MST and we want to honor MST. And we want to share with people the work we've done together. However, like as it was planned or written in a grant or somewhere that this document was going to be something written or whatever, and also all the miscommunication that happened in between, it felt that there was a high risk of like, now we can't tokenize BPU by putting them into this, like by putting this website. And that's where like that piece around like being very consentful and not like just having consent, but being full of consent became very important to us. That is like, how can we make a decision as a group that is exciting to all of us, that is reversible, that we can change our minds. It's not something that is set in stone because you did this, and not transactional too. Like, it's not because we helped you now that you have to do this. No, it's just like, you can say no if you don't want to. And like, it's just like all of those things that we managed to do together because we like collectively, we've been very supportive of each other and taking the time that we needed to ponder on the questions. But depending where people are at in their journeys, they can just like, oh, read this one, like there's this buzzwords that people in the sector keep saying. Okay, I shall add this to my grant report, and then invite, do the quota thing just to have more possibility of accessing funds or whatever, and then end up in a very, very like tokenistic and harmful place.
I want to add about what you're saying, consent, Bianca, because I think one of the important things that we've learned and that MST has learned throughout this process is that we have such a blind eye to all of our weaknesses or things that are inherent in the process that we don't see as weaknesses, but ultimately are when you're trying to work with a mutual aid organization. For example, the starting and stopping of grant funding. You're like, well, now the money's over, and so now we can't do anything anymore because we don't have money to pay Bianca and Qian. And that abrupt ending, so much more awful than I would have thought in terms of my own ethics or feeling around the project. Oh, well, it's just done now. And what does that actually mean when you're trying to enact mutual, try to help someone enact mutual aid, which is something that doesn't have an endpoint. It's not something that ends just because the money runs out. So I guess like it's hard for artist-run centers and arts institutions at this point to practice consent and I think that consent is like an important part of their readiness to be in community building, because we don't see so many of these things as weaknesses to building trust or to like having a thoughtful process. We're just like, that's just how it is. And I think ultimately that really has the capacity to really hurt people. And then the other thing that I want to add, but I might be getting ahead of myself, is just that the feeling, like being attuned to what it feels like when there is consent in the room versus when you're just saying a bunch of stuff and it's all like passing over everyone and no one like is on the same page about what you're about to do. Like the website, for example, we're all just kind of agreeing but not really sure. And then once we figured out that we didn't like it, then I felt the sense of what consent feels like. Like, we were more excited to do the podcast, and that was a very mutual thing, and it was very obvious. And I just wonder how we can build a capacity for being like attuned to what consent feels like and when it doesn't, and you're just agreeing to things because you think you have to.
And I just need to add something from what you said, Desiree. And this just made me think back to the question about what is an artist. Because MST, that is a group of artists. And if the institution was really, I'm not trying to point finger, but I'm just trying to clarify something. Because if an artist sits somewhere to do a job, if it's based on what is the artist is there to create, to change, to fight, there will be no point your art shouldn't be going for the fight. But that's why institution, when an art is come across with institution, if you know the meaning of your art, you will not try to fight for the people. Because that, first of all, the foundation of who you are as an artist is to fight for those values. But now, if an artist don't see that, institution will always come first. And when institution comes first, the meaning of art does not exist anymore. And if you come down to the art and society, that will always, like, society will not get you if you don't even know the meaning of who you are as an artist.
Yeah. Well, I'm expressive because of what you were saying about the institution always coming first. And it does in so many little ways that you're not even expecting to come out, like in the way that you have to make a 5-year plan, in the way that you hire employees sometimes, but not the other times. And it's kind of like this very weird balance between thinking like, if our relationships are so important and we believe what we're doing together, then we are okay with sinking this ship. Like if what we need is just like all the money right now, then it's fine. And we just like together burn it to the ground. Versus what's interesting about trying to make it work. Like for me as an organizer, I do find it interesting. I find there's a lot more to talk about still in like what we can possibly do with what this thing is. And so that's kind of getting all the way to question 3, but that's something I think the readiness to think about. This could all end tomorrow if we decided that we were more important than the institution is a really good thing to keep in mind.
I just want to say I really appreciate that we can have this podcast and talk so openly with each other. And I think this is already in itself a great step for an institution to have conversations about this topic. What can art offer to communities during a time of social unrest? How can we bridge art institutions and communities? Is this something that we should even attempt?
Again, I just think I go back to I've said this before, that, what is the artist's role if not to speak to the times? You know what we need more of? We need revolutionary artists. We need artists who are going to spark the revolution. That's really what we need. We need artists because my mom said this earlier, that I feel like artists, what this I don't want to say power like superheroes, but y'all are actually some form of superheroes. You tend to see things before the masses see it. Like you sense something before we do, right? And I feel like when you see that something, the whole point is not just to keep it for yourself and create your art and move on. No, you need to make the rest of us see it, right? So you need to make us imagine what you're imagining, because I find like artists are always just imagining creating a more beautiful world, and you need to help us imagine that too, because a lot of people do not believe in that possibility of a more beautiful world, of a better world. So when the artist has that vision of this world, expand that, bring us into that vision, and move us to working towards that vision, right? I don't know.
I have a question. What do you think would be more useful for an artist to help you bring you into that world? Is it a beautiful visualization of this world? Is it something more tangible that like actually does something for someone? What is like the most, I guess, like which approach?
I think about back in Guinea-Bissau, which is like an old French colony, and they had a really great theater company, because the president there, Ahmed Sékou Touré, he was really big into the arts, and he thought the artist's role was to spark revolution, was to bring people to understand like this is our condition, we need to fight back. And I remember there was a ballet, in Guinea, and the ballet, this was during colonial time, like they were under like French occupation, but the ballet would, like my mom said earlier, they would have these like messages weaved into it, which would essentially, tell folks that you need to fight back, right? Like literally within the dancing, within the words, within the text, there was these messages of, we need to struggle, we need to resist, we need to make the revolution happen. So I think that, whether it's visual artists, whether it's dancing, anything, those messages need to be there. Those little messages are going to make us think, make us analyze our present situation and see what can we do to change it, right? So I think also the artist has to be themselves very much tapped into the society, very much engaged themselves, right, within this community they're trying to awaken, because you can't do that from the outside. Think you're going to come and awaken the conscience from like over there. No, you need to be in here with us, because the people aren't going to just listen to some outside voice, right? It has to come from within their own group.
I wonder, Prudence, and maybe this is, I don't know how much derailing the conversation this question will go, so I don't know if I should ask.
Go for it.
My question is, when you're encountering an art piece of sorts, like whether it's a movie, whether it's a like museum visitation or a dance, whatever, a music, do you prefer when you like have a conclusion to the whatever story is that you're seeing, or do you prefer not having a conclusion?
I think I don't know if we need a conclusion. I think it's always like when I'm left with a question, maybe the artist is proposing an answer, but they're not giving me, there's no final answer. They're basically leaving it open for my own interpretation based on my own experience or my own way of seeing things. So as long as, I'm left with something to ponder.
Mm-hmm. I find that art that just gives you answers is quite boring. Like you might as well just read a book. at that point?
I don't.
I have a question.
I really don't think art give answer.
Yeah.
Let me go back working with you guys. All the time after meeting with you guys, I always say to Prudence that you guys are such an artist, because especially the colorful you guys present, I always put this big comment on the color, because that brings me back to my own culture. I'm a very colorful person. And just by the color, everything I put on myself, someone who read people can understand she's a happy, she's a smiling, everything speak himself. And I always see that on all the work you guys was doing, I was always looking at the color. And then for me, my own interpretation was that those people, this is your vision of the world. You look at that beautiful world, you see, because the world we live in is so sad, so bad, but you still find through your work to paint that beautiful world that you show us every day. So that was my own interpretation of the world I was doing. I was always looking for the color. And for me, that you guys vision of the world in this darkness. And that you don't give me that answer, but that's my own interpretation. And that's why artists, they should really in society give the opportunity to people to read that through their work. And that's how I was seeing you guys. Maybe that's what you were portraying, but all the time I was seeing that beautiful society through helping with mutual aid, through looking after people, because that's the beautiful world we want to live in. But are we living in that? But that was the interpretation of all the colorful I see behind you guys' work. And for me, if artists can just bring that to the level where everyone can look. Like when you walk in downtown on First Street Southeast, look at that picture, that artist that just put that guy in that glass. Why don't you have something like that in the forest line to give the chance of this poor kid to stand and look and give them their own imagination? What is their own interpretation? Because everyone would thrive on First Street, always have an idea of that poster, that statue. I have my own idea. I try to imagine what is the message. Should we give that to the community to give them the chance to discuss and interpret and find their own answer? Because art is always about your interpretation and how you feel the beauty and the message behind. No art is vain for me. There is no empty art in my life. None.
Maybe this also might be like a naive question, but and I personally, I want to enter it by saying that I think that there are useful, because we were talking about how everything is siloed, and that sucks, but I also think that there are useful delineations between kind of activism and artists. I do think that in terms of looking at them historically, there are, sometimes it's helpful to collapse them, and sometimes it's helpful to keep them in like as their own kind of disciplines. But I wonder, considering what you were just saying, Philomene, if you consider what you're doing when you're doing your mutual aid work and making this what you want to see in the world and in your community, do you think that you're doing art, or is it art to you? Because in some ways, I do think it is. I think this manifestation of the things that we want to see, even if it's in the public sphere and in our relationships, is an artwork. But, you know, whether Calgary Arts Development or like other funders think that is still up for debate. And I'm wondering if we should be pushing things in that direction where we're like, you should be funding stuff like this, and I'm really unreconciled in that personally. I don't know. So I'm wondering what you think in terms of how you consider what you're doing. Do you consider what you're doing art?
I think that just the psychology effect of what I'm doing is that I imagine that beautiful world where we look after each other, right? Even though I'm doing at the level that's not constant, but my goal, my vision, I have that vision of that beautiful society where we all look after each other. So that the vision. Maybe I'm trying to change something, but my vision is just what I have in my mind. Maybe it's artistic, or is it spiritual or imaginary? It's just my own vision of the world doing that. That's how the beautiful what I have in my mind, even though practical, that's not the word, right? But that's my vision. In fact, it's built inside my own head, and I just try to start it.
I'm also curious what you think, Prudence, if you have anything to add to that.
I don't know. I don't really, maybe because I'm like just so not artistic. Like I don't see art in this type of capacity. No, I really don't. I'm obviously not creative enough to even imagine something like that being art.
Maybe you should give that question to Bianca.
I have a question though. Oh, why
Like,
Bianca?
what
You
is
love
your
to just
opinion of
choose
a
people.
colorful word that you guys, both of you have a very colorful design? Because for me, I always think that you are image, you are vision of the beautiful society, or you just love color.
Well, if I can speak, like, I think that what BPU does is art. By what you said, Philomene, and also what Prudence said, like the definition of art as like being this possibility of imagining and thinking of different ways of being together, like BPU is doing that. And I think there is the difference of like that I think Desiree spoke to a little earlier too, of like the aesthetics. So like the visuals, or like if not visuals, but like how things are or how they are embodied in terms of like an art practice, that I think sometimes we associate that as more being art than the relational aspect. And I think the relational aspect is as artistic as the aesthetical aspect of art. And yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question, Philomene, or no? Or did I miss something?
Well, I would like to add to that question because we actually do have artists in the room, and I keep saying that I believe art. This is the role of the artist. Like, what do y'all see your role as artists, or do you even think it's maybe because I've heard this before from some artists who they think it's like they like reject even the fact that there's like this expectation of their art where we should just let them paint because they feel like painting and it's for themselves. Like, do you believe you have a role? Like, do you believe your art should be, reflecting the times? Like, how do y'all feel about my expectations, I guess, of artists?
Speak so loud, especially in this moment.
I was like relieved to hear that you like had those expectations, because I've always been told that's like not reasonable or not fair. And I'm like, okay, so when has the world been reasonable or fair, first of all? Second of all, like, if I want this to be part of my life, it has to be a part of what expectations I hold of myself. Like, if I'm writing something and I want it to be also speaking to what that artist cares about. Like, if that artist has like a cause, I want that cause to be explicitly mentioned in my writing. And I also want that to bring people into what my mind is doing and like, the futures that I hope for. Like, give a small glimpse into that and then bringing them into like, sometimes I'm like, okay, so like, here's a glimpse into like what I hope for, and then here's the hellscape, or like, here's the glimpse into what I want, here's what we're doing. And like, in my writing, I think I do have really high expectations of myself. And I have friends that are white that have been like, well, you just have to take jobs that you like, don't really, agree with. And I'm like, well, if I can't work with an editor to speak the way that I speak, like, what's the point? And like, what's the point of me having a voice if I can't use it in a way that is impactful and meaningful? And like, personally for me, like, I don't feel like I have a right just to create something to create it, which is something, like, sometimes I do need to just write for myself, but I don't, because I'm just like, no, I need to channeling everything that I'm learning because it's so amazing. But also, like, yeah, I think that there needs to be a better balance of like that drive, because I have like a little less balance on the other end of it, but that's definitely an expectation I have. And I can't talk to you about art that doesn't
that the artist doesn't have anything to say in their artist statement other than they went to school and learned color theory, which is like actually what I've seen in a lot of professional galleries, which is like deeply upsetting. Like, I use color theory. I'm like, you're a painter. I hope so. But like, you know, it's just kind of, there's this deep mediocrity. And then also classism that comes into that. Like, if you're not doing it a certain way, then it's not good enough. And I really don't think, I think that I've been messed up through school, and I think that other people have been messed up through school with their expectations of the completeness of art, so to say, like that's in scare quotes, complete. But yeah, I love hearing what you're saying, because I'm like, okay, I'll keep going.
I think no one should silence you, because I'm not an artist, I'm not creative, but looking about artists around me, there are unique people. You foresee the thing before. And when I hear you speak, many artists that don't express themselves, like look at Kate Spade. She painted her universe so beautiful. Everything was so colorful. But what happened to her? She killed herself. Because that beautiful universe, that dream line she was living in her mind was so sad outside. So you shouldn't silence yourself. If you are born an artist, it was not vain. A vain artist should change it to find a new job. You are not an artist. You need to express yourself. You need to put your vision out there. And that's why you should take that to the community, because there are people that are going to stand on your side and help you change the world. Artist is not there to paint for no reason. That's my universe, and I've seen that. My advice at this point is that you guys shouldn't let propaganda and the Western culture push you guys, because like looking at the art, the way musician, designer, these are society, that these are the people who come to society to create and to change. You have so much beauty to bring to the world, but somehow the propaganda and the commercial just shift that, and it just become transaction. And I can just right now see how in mutual aid you guys was so connected. That side of looking of changing society that was just showing through the work that you guys were doing with BPU. And I'm just so happy today that we come to the understanding why we were so connected, why it was so easy. Because we're trying, we have that vision together. You guys have the artist way, we have the hands-on way. So we're just people doing the job, but the art, the creativity was just coming from you guys. And I'm strongly believe you guys should forget the West and the transaction, go out there and change society with your vision and everything that is inside. That thing should come out and make change. There's no artist that can change. You must. You have the ability. Come to the community, speak out. Let us glow like a flower. I'm just so happy with this conversation. I'm sorry where you guys are, but it's so nice today. I love it.
Divest or reform? Who should lead the restructure of an institution? Can they actually do this work? How willing are nonprofits willing to reform themselves?
I'll come in with a practical thing. So we all have boards of directors. In my experience, people are not like in really privileged financial positions and positions of free time when they're serving on our boards. It's not necessarily like a corporate board where maybe there's like lawyers and a doctor and like somebody who's just like retired and like just wants to give their time to an organization and has that time. So there's that, because I am on a board and I do want to do this. And then when I watch, even this is like not real, but like TV shows where they're like boards are like, yeah, like I'm like, we should have this programming or whatever. And I'm like, wow, like imagine having the energy and time to be able to bring in our own programming, or like to be able to bring in something to share with our, like wherever we're working with. So that's a practical thing that I consider a lot, because there are some socioeconomic factors that come into play when we're talking about the artist-run center restructuring. But and I think that once we're able to be in spaces together again, I'll be able to feel more clear about it, because I think that's where we'll see what kind of communities, we have created or need to be working on. But especially like in the so-called art world, I'm biased because I've been able to pay for therapy because I work in the arts. So it's kind of hard for me because I know this is a space where I've been safe, but I know that others haven't been. So it's hard to balance those and figure out how to step outside of our comfort zone in terms of who we're connecting with and what artists we work with, and how we even learn about those things when there's so many people and so many people creating, and some people that aren't even on Instagram or aren't even posting anywhere that probably are just as worthy of a show and space and eyes on their project. But I think that while we have to survive under capitalism, that's also a challenge to consider for that. And we always are talking about how would you even pass on all the assets without passing on the bureaucratic structure. Is that a thing that we can do? Is there a way that we can pool, if all the artist run centers in Mohkinstsis decided to pool all their resources and have these granting bodies that we've kind of secured passed on to other people that need that in, I think that there's also a dismantling or a redistributing that people have been thinking about, but we're also in the midst of undoing bureaucratic training that people like Desiree have to learn to be able to even get grants or get funding. Yeah.
I don't know, I guess, to what extent institutions, artists, one, nonprofits can really restructure themselves, within the framework of the current world we live in, which is, deeply rooted in capitalism, consumerism, profit over people. It's how far can your restructure really go, in this type of setting, right? To me, I mean, this might seem radical, but to me, I feel like it just simply has to be an abandonment of these institutions, and it has to be rebuilt with it. Because if you think about the foundation of these institutions, right, how are you going to restructure on a foundation like that? You simply can't, right? You simply can't you can't reform a foundation like that. You simply have to tear everything down and restart on a new foundation. Maybe that's based on people and community and the collective. And then you build your institutions, which we didn't call institution, you would start maybe collectives, right? I think that's really what it's going to take if you are truly sincere about wanting, to really invest in something that's not just profit. If you want to invest in people, then you can't try to edit yourself on a basis that's rooted in profit and capital. It doesn't work. It can't be real transformative restructuring, right? It can just be a little tweaking, a little here and there, but it's not really going to be long lasting. So I don't know, to me, I think it needs to be a divesting and then a rebuilding, and it's challenging, but it can be done because there are more people, right, than there are, there's so many people who could do things, right? The challenge seems great, but there's also a great amount of us to contribute to this great challenge, right? So I think it's definitely doable, but there has to be a willingness to for radical change and not for reformative change, because reformative change just gets us nowhere. We don't actually move, we stay in the same place.
Because the arts institutions, a lot of them don't have a lot of resources. So what happens is a lot of the people who are working for the arts as in the more administrative side of the non-for-profit, they have a deep sense of identity attached to those institutions. And then you have like, when you're talking about restructuring organizations, especially in this past year, it's been a buzzword for multiple different arts organizations. And in response to acknowledging the white supremacy within organizations. And it also means for people who work in those organizations, acknowledging how they upheld white supremacy.
What I'm thinking about is, where do rules come from? There must be a reason why some rules are in place. So it might be worth examining, like, why are these rules here? Maybe some rules are old and can be thrown in the trash. I'm also thinking about boundaries and care, and how these rules might have come into place to honor those boundaries and care. I'm thinking about burnout and how, like individual burnout, and how like maybe some of these rules were put into place, maybe some of these bureaucratic structures were put in place to prevent individuals from overgiving or overexerting themselves.
I mean, you said something like, these rules, but I guess before we have to ask ourselves, who made these rules?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because to assume, I mean, based on the kind of world we live in, I know none of these rules are in place for care or to avoid burnout. It's really, it's not rooted in the kind of things that I can think that it's actually for the people. Right? Like, so I have to ask myself, who made these rules? And are these rules really to benefit the masses, or is it to benefit a few amount of people, but convince us that it's actually for the good of all of us? But I think that in terms of just like having structure, I think that's another thing. I feel like the thought, when we think about dismantling and restarting, like people just think about like destruction, but I also think about building, right? Like, there's something really nice about building, and, because it demands a lot of creativity from us. It demands us to dream, because I think we tend to be convinced that, this is just how things are. This is best we can do as humans and societies, but it's like somebody imagined this world for us, and I think we can imagine something better.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's just a dreamland. We live in a true society. We live in reality. And the reality is that for people, for the minority to be who they are, but instead for the minority, the mass, to find their way to the minority, the majority, the mass try everything they can reach that level. So they are not focusing on how can we destroy or how can we reform. They think someday or somehow they're gonna reach that level. So my answer for this question, reform, restructure, with how can we work around this system? It's how can people start using their creativity, their everything, the tool they have to work around the structure? How many people are willing to start invest in mutual, in just improving? How can we improve the situation? Work around and how to improve the like this world was built to be the way it is, and for million years. So work around, improve.
I don't know. What do you mean work around though? So I mean, are we saying to make these institutions then obsolete to the point where we don't even need to look towards them? We've created our own way of doing things, and I mean, if we arrive at a place of organizing where that is the case, then those institutions can only exist because we, we're there with them, right? Like we invest in them, we work for them. But if the people have created their own way of doing things, then these places essentially fall, right? They can't maintain themselves on their own.
But the mission of the mass is to find a way to be like those people.
Yes, of course, we understand the masses are
We all think life is transaction. We all think we should make money, because that's how society is. That's the reality of life. That our world, this world we are trying to create imaginary, is a vision. But we live in a transaction, we live in a business land.
And what I think it's like thinking about that, I think the answer is then maybe some organizations need to divest and others need to reform. Like in a way that maybe the organizations that are, because there are organizations that are more like BIPOC led, and those organizations maybe are further apart on acknowledging white supremacy and how the bureaucratic systems harm people. And maybe they're more equipped to reforming than an institution that is just like understanding what certain things mean. But I think that other organizations, they just need to divest, because what we've seen in this process is a lot of the organizations that are a lot of people that their mandate says they do certain work, and not necessarily they are able to do the work they're saying they do. And then they're taking the money. And then when we look at the community, our communities, there are people that are doing the work and they're not necessarily getting recompensated financially for their work. And then thinking of what Philomene is saying, like, we still live in the world where we need to deal with finances and we need to get money. So why some people are not doing the work and getting money, and other people are doing the work and not getting money from it?
I also just think of pop culture ideas of this is like kind of from left field, but like woo, like of tarot cards, like the Tower, which is like one of my, like, I'm like, great, there's a change coming, or like, you know, like the fear that people are told to feel about change, the way that politicians are seen as, like, you know, people are like, oh, they're flaky. It's like, maybe they learned something and they changed their mind. Like, we're in this like culture, we're changing, and like learning in that way isn't really like normalized. It's like it's like made just like into like a fear by, you know, the way that people who hold power have made change seem like really bad, and like we don't know what we're doing, like the very paternalistic kind of ways that our society tries to belittle us and make us feel like we can't change things. But yeah, I definitely don't want the art community in Mohkinstsis to look anything like it does right now, as I've, like, you know, as I've been able to see it. Like, I really want it to be completely different. Like, I don't, you know, like, I don't even know like what it's going to look like, but I definitely think it's time for other people to take up space and dictate what's shown, and what is considered art, based on, you know, and have that outside of, you know, have that include people that haven't went to a post-secondary institution, and have that include, you know, disabled folks, racialized folks, and you know, a lot of our institutions are not accessible in many ways. Like, we don't have scent policies, we don't have, you know, like, I used to work at a place that was very like, you couldn't get in there if you had a wheelchair. So like, there's some very basic things that are also like, it's just like, this isn't for everyone at all, because it's ableist, or because it's you know, they're all downtown. For the artist friend centers are mostly all downtown, and that's not really accessible, like, to a lot of people. Like, you know, it's all downtown, so like, what does that actually represent? Like, does that actually represent Mohkinstsis, or is that more like a set, you know, like being honest about the areas that we're in and the actual scope of like what we're doing, and not trying to pretend like we're like making Mohkinstsis better or something. I think is like, I think once we're able to be more honest, we'll be able to change. Because as Prudence brought up earlier, like, we do need to be able to be honest with ourselves and ask ourselves questions, and being willing to ask ourselves questions on an ongoing basis. And that's something that I'm always just like really excited about. Like, I love thinking about how to ask better questions, and be okay with like not knowing what people will, I think it's also not knowing what people will do once some of these constraints are taken off, or once, like, yeah, it's hard, because it's like, yes, people need money. So it's like, you know, once people have the money to do that, and like, we can just shut up and like step back. Like, I don't know better than anybody how to put on an art show, you know? And I think, or how to talk about art. Like, I loved this conversation because I don't think we've gotten to get into this in our meetings. And like, I love like the quotes y'all brought in. I'm like, I want to see like, you know, what kind of stuff like Prudence would curate, and like what kind of like, you know, people throughout history like you would put with these artworks. Like, you already were doing that kind of like I was, you know, I was like taking a couple notes. I was just like, okay, like I think that the scope of like our like my formal education is really brutally narrow, and it makes me sad because I feel like that narrowness in our community also creates like, it's just not I want to be broadened. That's like, you know, I want to be broadened, and I don't think it's as broadening as it could be. And like, you know, speaking to kids about art too, like I would love to just like, you know, come to some kids and be like, what do you want to make? And just be able to hear what they're interested in and be like, okay, like, and make it happen for them. And just like, you know, just like be like, give them anything that they want and just let them go, you know, or, you know, if a community wants to do something together, like just give them the things and then like step out, which is also, I think, yeah.
And then there is something I want to add, talking about this toy reform, these are just what. One thing I know about artists, they are not politicians. I've never seen an artist in politics. So somehow there's a big power, there's a big tool in the hand of artists. You guys are armed. You guys have gone to fight the system. But so far, so much propaganda has been happening. Because even if you look back as a young child, listen to Bob Marley. Today at this age, Bob Marley was not just dead, but what everyone know Bob Marley about what? Rasta, his hair. That was propaganda. To just take all the attention of the message he was using to fight the capitalism, to change the society. They just changed everything. The propaganda just overpowered Bob Marley. All we know as a child is his hair. So artists, if you guys can really use that natural tool that is inside, because that voice is inside, that the gun you guys have to go out there and change and reform and restructure. But so far, artists have been so like moved to that that propaganda. I don't even know how to show you guys how all this thing is that gun that this politician, they know you have it, and the only way to allow you guys not to use it is just to show like different version of who you guys are, and then the masses will focus on that, and then the message will never be brought at the surface. So we need to use that.
I will have to, you know, intervene a little bit because you said that artists are not politicians. I think what's happened to artists is that there's been a lot of like, I think it's because the powers that be that are evil are aware of the power of art, which is why they work very, very hard to make sure that artists are not aware of the power that they have so that they do not use their art to benefit the masses. Because a lot of, you know, great revolutionaries have actually been artists. You know, Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam was a poet. You know, Amilcar Cabral was a poet. Sankara, he played the guitar. Like, there's actually been a ton of revolutionary artists, but, you know, whenever we talk about them, we forget the art part because we don't want artists to realize like you actually have like a weapon. You do have something quite special that you can use for our collective well-being, our not collective liberation. So I think that artists need to, you know, just tap into that power and not let the powers that be convince them that your art is only meant for your individual self or art galleries and like a $10,000 check for some weird lady who's going to think this is like belongs in her kitchen, right? It's like, no, your art, you know, is actually quite powerful and you have something really, really important to say, but they don't want you to say it.
I think that's a great note to end because I think it's a very powerful last note. We could go on and on about this for a long time. And as like Milady said, was really cool to get to talk about this part of things, because we never got into this in our meetings, and super deep and rich to hear your thoughts into art and all of the things. Now we would like to give you some space to talk about like BPU, how people can support you.
Yeah, I mean, BPU, like, I feel like we don't even just want to plug in BPU, we just want to plug in the practice of mutual aid, because if folks practice mutual aid like as a normal thing, if collective care was just a normal part of our life, then, you know, it would all feed into BPU, right? It would feed into all the other mutual aid collectives that have been popping in our city, which is so wonderful. So really, I think the message here is that, like my mom said at the very beginning, like everybody needs to do something, like just something, because if we all just did a tiny bit of our part just to care a little bit more, like this world would just be transformed. So I think our message is just, I think folks need to get into the habit of looking out for one another without expecting anything, and just doing it because at the end of the day, like human beings like need each other. Like I know we live in a world that tries to tell us like, oh, yourself, individual, I, me, myself, and I, but we actually can't survive without each other. Like, that's a simple fact. Like we literally cannot exist without one another. So why are we not caring for one another? So I think we just want to encourage people, like, you know, if BPU, you know, maybe doesn't work for you, like in your own collectives, in your own groups or whatever, do your own form of mutual aid. You know, talk to your neighbor, you know, talk to people on the street, ask questions, you know, care about people and how they're feeling. It's just, people need to be tapped in and try to actually build community, because right now what we're doing is building community, because we don't have communities in this world that's like trying to, you know, be hyper individual and hyper independent and all just the worst things for us. So I would just say to folks, you know, if you want to tap in with BPU, that's great. If not, tap in with the table, tap in with, you know, Bear Clan, you know, start your own. There's no such thing as too much mutual aid. We need all the folks engaged. Like, start your own. What is happening in your neighborhood that you are like, this is not cool, I need to address this. I think we can make this a little bit better. Do that. So I think the message here is just like, we need everybody engaged in mutual aid. Mutual aid is not a BPO thing, it's not a table thing, it's not a Bear Clan thing. It needs to be like a collective. Everybody is engaged in mutual aid. Like, we all need to practice. It's a practice, right? So, but if you want to help us, we're BPU Calgary on Instagram, so you can message us and, you know, tap in with us for sure. But yeah, just tap in, just practice mutual aid really is the message here.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Prudence. And I think we'll end on that. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.